The smell of ozone and burnt metal hung thick in the air of the makeshift repair bay, where Marcus Webb was trying to convince a piece of Zephyrian technology that it should, in fact, continue existing instead of dissolving into its component atoms. The biomechanical servo he was working on had been sparking for the better part of an hour, apparently offended by his human hands, attempting to understand its delicate alien sensibilities. "Come on," Webb muttered, adjusting the harmonic resonance tool for the 15th time. "I've seen your species fix these things with what looks like interpretive dance. There's got to be a logic to it." The Battle of Nexus Prime had ended 18 hours ago, leaving behind a graveyard of twisted metal, crystalline debris, and the kind of silence that only came after too many people had stopped breathing. The victory against the Void Swarm had come at a cost that made Webb's stomach clench every time he thought about the casualty reports, but it had been a victory nonetheless. Humanity's colonial forces and the Zephyrian Empire had managed to work together long enough to save both their species from becoming cosmic lunch. Webb's specialty was making incompatible technologies play nicely together, a skill that had become unexpectedly valuable when humanity discovered they weren't alone in the galaxy, and that most of their new neighbors had equipment that operated on principles that made quantum mechanics look straightforward. 3 months of intensive cross-training with Zephyrian engineers had taught him enough to be useful, though he still felt like he was performing surgery with oven mitts most of the time. The repair bay was a testament to interspecies cooperation and creative chaos. Human diagnostic equipment jury-rigged to interface with Zephyrian biomechanical systems, power conduits that pulsed with organic light feeding energy to devices that hummed with electronic efficiency. It shouldn't have worked, but necessity had a way of making the impossible merely improbable. Webb. The voice belonged to Commander Harrison, whose expression suggested he was about to deliver news that would complicate Webb's day in creative ways. "Drop what you're doing. You've got a priority assignment." Webb carefully set down the servo, which immediately stopped sparking and began glowing a contented blue. Of course it would start working the moment he stopped trying to fix it. "Let me guess. Another impossible integration project with a deadline that was yesterday." "Better. Queen Lysara's armor took heavy damage in the final assault. Her biomechanical systems are failing, and she needs immediate repair work before the next wave hits." Harrison's tone carried the kind of careful neutrality that meant he was discussing something well above both their pay grades. Webb blinked. Queen Lysara, the Zephyrian ruler whose tactical brilliance had orchestrated their victory, whose personal combat skills had turned the tide when the Void Swarm broke through their defensive lines, whose mere presence on the battlefield had inspired both human and Zephyrian forces to fight beyond their limits. The idea of her needing his help with anything seemed absurd. "Commander, I'm honored by the confidence, but shouldn't their own engineers handle royal armor maintenance? I'm still figuring out how to keep their coffee makers from achieving sentience." Harrison's expression suggested that Webb had just asked why water was wet. "Their engineers are either dead, critically injured, or dealing with life support failures across the fleet. You're the only human technician who's demonstrated compatibility with their biomechanical interfaces. Besides, she specifically requested you." That information hit Webb like a tactical surprise he hadn't seen coming. He'd worked with Zephyrian equipment extensively during the battle preparations, but always as part of larger engineering teams. The idea that Queen Lysara had noticed his work, much less remembered his name, was both flattering and terrifying. "Requested me. Are we sure she didn't mean that human engineer in general rather than me specifically?" "Webb, when the Queen of the Zephyrian Empire requests someone by name, we don't debate the details. We say, 'Yes, Your Majesty,' and hope we don't accidentally start an interstellar incident." Harrison handed him a data pad containing security clearances that Webb had never seen before. "Her personal guard will escort you. Try not to break anything that costs more than our annual defense budget. Webb gathered his tools with the kind of careful precision that came from knowing that a single mistake could have consequences measured in light years and body counts. His standard engineering kit looked pathetically inadequate for working on royal armor, but he'd learned to make do with what he had. The harmonic resonance calibrator that had been giving him trouble all morning now seemed to purr with cooperative efficiency, apparently sensing the importance of its upcoming assignment. The journey through the Zephyrian fortress to Queen Lysara's private quarters was a lesson in architectural intimidation. Corridors that seemed to pulse with organic life, lighting systems that responded to the emotional states of occupants, and walls decorated with art that appeared to shift and change when viewed from different angles. Webb's human eyes struggled to process the seamless integration of biological and technological elements that made Zephyrian design so distinctive. The royal guards who escorted him were professional soldiers whose armor bore the scars of recent combat, but who moved with the fluid grace that characterized all Zephyrians. They treated Webb with the kind of respectful caution reserved for someone who was either very important or very dangerous, and he wasn't entirely sure which category he fell into. Engineer Webb, one of the guards said as they approached an ornate door that seemed to be grown rather than constructed. Her Majesty is experiencing significant discomfort from her armor's neural interface failures. Please work quickly, but be aware that any sudden movements or loud noises may trigger defensive responses from the biomechanical systems. Webb nodded, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. Understood. How extensive is the damage? The chest plate's primary neural interface was severed during combat with the Void Swarm's command entity. Secondary systems are maintaining minimal function, but complete failure is estimated within 6 hours. The door dilated open with organic smoothness, revealing a chamber that managed to be both opulent and practical. Clearly the private quarters of someone who ruled an empire, but also personally led its armies into battle. Queen Lysara stood with her back to the entrance, her damaged armor casting strange shadows in the bioluminescent lighting. Webb had seen the Queen before, of course, during battle briefings, strategic planning sessions, and the victory celebration that had followed their triumph over the Void Swarm. But always at a distance, always surrounded by advisors and guards, always projecting the kind of regal authority that made mere mortals remember their place in the cosmic hierarchy. Now alone in her private chambers with her armor crackling and failing around her, Queen Lysara looked different. Still magnificent, still carrying herself with the poise that came from commanding absolute respect, but also vulnerable. The elongated ears that marked her as Zephyrian royalty drooped slightly with fatigue, and her luminous skin had taken on a pallor that spoke of pain being carefully controlled. "Engineer Webb," she said without turning around, her voice carrying the musical quality that all Zephyrians possessed but somehow more resonant. "Thank you for responding so quickly. I apologize for the urgency, but as you can see, my armor and I are having a disagreement about continued cooperation." Webb approached carefully, noting the way sparks of bioelectrical energy arced across the damaged chest plate, and began to understand why this repair job couldn't wait for proper Zephyrian technicians. The armor wasn't just damaged, it was actively failing in ways that could be fatal if not addressed immediately. "Your Majesty," Webb began, then stopped as he got his first close look at the damage. Oh, that's really not good." The chest plate of Queen Lysara's armor looked like it had been designed by someone who understood that protection and beauty weren't mutually exclusive, then attacked by something that disagreed with that philosophy on principle. Crystalline components were cracked, biomechanical conduits were severed, and the neural interface points were sparking with the kind of electrical activity that suggested the armor was trying very hard to maintain connection with its wearer despite missing several critical components. "I have been told that human understatement is a form of humor," Queen Lysara said, finally turning to face him. "In this case, I find it less amusing than usual." Webb set down his tool kit and activated his diagnostic scanner, trying not to notice how the Queen's presence seemed to make the room's bioluminescent panels glow brighter. Professional focus, he reminded himself. Royal armor repair was probably not the time to appreciate alien aesthetics. "The good news is that your armor's self-repair systems are still partially functional," Webb said, studying the readings on his scanner. "The bad news is that they're trying to rebuild the neural interface while it's still connected to your nervous system, which is why you're getting feedback pain." "Feedback pain," Queen Lysara repeated, settling carefully onto what appeared to be a biomechanical chair that adjusted itself to support her weight. "Is that the technical term for feeling like lightning is being channeled directly through my spine?" "That's actually a pretty accurate description, yes." Webb began unpacking his tools, noting how the harmonic resonance calibrator was already humming in harmony with the Queen's armor systems. "I'm going to need to work on the interface while you're wearing the armor. Removing it completely could cause permanent neurological damage." Queen Lysara nodded, though Webb caught the slight tension in her posture that suggested the idea of someone working so close to her nervous system wasn't entirely comfortable. "You have experience with biomechanical neural interfaces." "Some," Webb said, which was technically true if you counted the 3-week crash course he'd taken in Zephyrian biotechnology, and the handful of successful repairs he'd managed without accidentally killing anyone. "The principles are similar to human cybernetic implants, just more alive." "More alive," she repeated, and this time there was definitely amusement in her voice. "Engineer Webb, your technical descriptions are refreshingly honest." Webb activated the first of his diagnostic tools, watching as holographic displays began mapping the damage to her armor systems. The neural interface was indeed severed in multiple places, but the breaks were clean, surgical precision rather than random battle damage. "Your Majesty, can you tell me exactly what happened to cause this level of interface damage? This looks almost like it was deliberately targeted." Queen Lysara's expression grew more serious, her luminous eyes reflecting the holographic displays as she considered her answer. "The Void Swarm's command entity attempted to subvert my armor's control systems during combat. When I resisted the intrusion, it severed the neural connections rather than allow me to maintain control." Webb paused in his work, processing the implications. "It tried to take over your armor while you were wearing it. The Void Swarm learns from each encounter. They had studied our biomechanical technology extensively during previous battles. The command entity was attempting to turn our own defensive systems against us." Her voice carried the kind of controlled anger that suggested this had been a very personal violation. "That's..." Webb searched for an appropriate response and settled for technical accuracy. "That's absolutely terrifying, but it also explains why the damage is so precise. The entity knew exactly which connections to sever to disable your armor without killing you immediately." "Indeed, though I suspect its intent was to capture rather than kill. The Void Swarm has shown particular interest in acquiring specimens with command capabilities." Webb suppressed a shudder at the thought of Queen Lysara in the hands of the Void Swarm, then focused on the repair work with renewed determination. "Well, let's make sure they don't get another chance. I'm going to start with the primary neural pathways, but I need you to tell me immediately if you feel any unexpected sensations." He began the delicate process of realigning the severed biomechanical conduits, using tools that responded to both human technological interfaces and Zephyrian biosignatures. The work required absolute precision. One wrong adjustment could leave the Queen paralyzed or worse. As Webb worked, Queen Lysara began to share more about the battle than had been included in any official reports. The personal cost of leading from the front, the weight of making decisions that affected billions of lives, the isolation that came with command responsibility that couldn't be shared with subordinates. "You know," Webb said, carefully adjusting a neural relay that was sparking ominously, "I never expected to be having philosophical discussions about leadership while elbow-deep in royal armor. And I never expected to find myself dependent on human engineering expertise to maintain basic biological functions," Queen Lysara replied. "War creates many unexpected circumstances." Webb's scanner indicated that the primary pathways were responding well to repair, but the secondary interface networks were going to require more invasive work. "Your Majesty, the next phase is going to be more intimate. I need to recalibrate the armor's connection to your autonomic nervous system, which means working very close to your body's core bioelectrical patterns." Queen Lysara was quiet for a moment, and Webb realized he was asking her to trust him with access to the most fundamental aspects of her physiology, the bioelectrical patterns that controlled everything from her heartbeat to her thought processes. "Engineer Webb," she said finally, "3 days ago, you were a stranger from an alien species. Now I am trusting you with my life in ways that I have never trusted anyone, including my own people. Either this war has made me remarkably poor at risk assessment, or there is something about your work that inspires confidence." Webb felt the weight of that trust settling on his shoulders like a responsibility he'd never asked for but couldn't refuse. "Your Majesty, I promise you this. I may not be the most experienced engineer in the galaxy, but I will give everything I have to make sure your armor serves you as well as you serve your people." As he began the complex process of neural interface recalibration, Webb noticed that Queen Lysara's breathing had become more controlled, the kind of deliberate rhythm that suggested she was managing significant discomfort. The repair process was necessarily invasive, requiring him to essentially rewrite the connection between her nervous system and the biomechanical armor that was as much a part of her as her own skin. "Is the discomfort manageable?" Webb asked, pausing in his work to check her bio-readings. "Define manageable," Queen Lysara said, though her voice carried a hint of dry humor. "I have experienced worse. Though I admit, allowing someone else such direct access to my neural patterns is an unusual sensation." Webb's hands remained steady as he worked, but he was acutely aware of the intimacy of the situation. The way her armor's bioluminescent patterns responded to his touch, the trust she was placing in his human hand to repair systems that were integrated with her very consciousness. This was beyond technical work. It was an act of faith between two beings who had every reason to mistrust each other but had chosen otherwise. The critical moment arrived when Webb had to access the armor's primary neural interface, the central connection point, where Queen Lysara's consciousness merged with the biomechanical systems that enhanced her combat capabilities and provided life support functions. His diagnostic readings showed that this connection was hanging by metaphorical threads, and the slightest mistake could sever it permanently. "Your Majesty," Webb said, his voice carefully steady, "I need to completely rebuild the core interface. This means temporarily disconnecting your consciousness from the armor systems while I work. You'll be completely vulnerable during the recalibration process." Queen Lysara was quiet for a long moment, her luminous eyes studying Webb's face with an intensity that made him feel like she was reading his soul. "How long will I be disconnected?" "Maybe 10 minutes if everything goes perfectly, longer if I encounter complications." Webb met her gaze directly, knowing she deserved complete honesty. "Your Majesty, I need you to understand what you're risking. If something goes wrong during the disconnection, I might not be able to re-establish the neural link. You could be permanently separated from your armor systems. And without my armor's life support integration, I would die within hours," Queen Lysara said matter-of-factly. "I am aware of the risks, Engineer Webb. What I need to know is whether you believe you can successfully complete the repair." Webb considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. His training was adequate, His experience with Zephyrian technology was limited but growing, and his understanding of the specific biomechanical systems involved was theoretical at best. By any reasonable assessment, he was the wrong person for this job. Honestly, Webb said, I'm not sure anyone could guarantee success with this kind of repair, but I know more about your armor's integration with human technology than any other engineer available, and I've successfully interfaced human and Zephyrian systems before. If you're willing to trust me, I'll give everything I have to make sure you survive this. Queen Lysara smiled then, not the formal expression of royal courtesy he'd seen during official functions, but something genuine and warm that transformed her entire face. Engineer Webb, do you know what I told my advisors when they questioned my decision to ally with humanity? No, Your Majesty. I told them that any species capable of producing individuals willing to risk everything for strangers was worth trusting with our survival. Today, you are proving that assessment correct. Webb felt something shift in his chest, a responsibility that went beyond professional duty, a connection that transcended the differences between their species. Then let's make sure I don't disappoint you. Are you ready? Queen Lysara settled back in the biomechanical chair, which immediately began extending supportive tendrils to monitor her vital signs. Proceed, Engineer Webb. And Marcus. It was the first time she'd used his first name, and something about the way she said it made the formal distance between them seem suddenly artificial. Yes, Your Majesty. If this goes poorly, please tell my people that their queen died trusting in the alliance we built together. That choice has meaning, regardless of the outcome. Webb activated the disconnection sequence, watching as the bioluminescent patterns in Queen Lysara's armor began to fade. Her breathing immediately became more labored as the life support systems transferred to backup power, and he could see the effort it took for her to maintain consciousness without the armor's neural support. Working with desperate precision, Webb began rebuilding the neural interface from its most basic components. Each connection had to be perfect. Too loose, and the link would fail under stress. Too tight, and the feedback could cause permanent brain damage. His hands moved with mechanical certainty while his mind calculated power flows, neural pathway mapping, and bioelectrical compatibility ratios. Marcus, Queen Lysara said quietly, her voice strained. What changed? I met a little girl on Kepler Station whose parents had been killed by weapons I designed. She asked me if I was proud of my work. Webb's hands never paused in their precise movements, but his voice carried old pain. I couldn't answer her, left the corporate life the next day and joined the Colonial Engineering Corps. Figured maybe I could build things that helped people instead of killing them. And now you are rebuilding the armor of an alien queen to help her protect billions of lives. That seems like meaningful work. Webb began the delicate process of re-establishing the primary neural connections, watching as bioelectrical patterns slowly began to synchronize between Queen Lysara's nervous system and the armor's control matrices. Meaningful, yes. Terrifying, absolutely. The armor systems came online gradually, bioluminescent patterns brightening, as each connection was reestablished. Webb monitored the integration process with the kind of focused attention that excluded everything except the readings on his diagnostic displays and the steady rhythm of the Queen's breathing. Neural integration at 60%, he reported, adjusting a connection that was showing minor resistance. Autonomic functions stabilizing, motor control pathways responding normally. Queen Lysara's posture straightened as the armor's support systems resumed full function, her breathing becoming deeper and more natural. The pain is gone, she said with obvious relief. Marcus, I can feel the armor responding like it did before the battle. Better than before, actually. I made some improvements while I was rebuilding the interface, Webb admitted, monitoring the final calibration sequences. Human diagnostic protocols integrated with your biomechanical systems should give you better real-time damage assessment, and more efficient power distribution. You enhanced my armor's capabilities while repairing it. Webb looked up from his diagnostic readings to find Queen Lysara staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. The integration opportunities were obvious once I understood how your neural interface processed information. I hope that was appropriate. I should have asked permission before making modifications. Queen Lysara stood and moved through a series of test motions, her armor responding with fluid precision that seemed to surprise even her. "Marcus Webb," she said, "you have given me capabilities I did not know were possible. My armor feels like an extension of my own body in ways it never did before." "That was the goal," Webb said, beginning to pack up his tools. "The interface should now respond to subconscious commands as well as conscious ones. Your combat effectiveness should be significantly improved." "Combat effectiveness," Queen Lysara repeated thoughtfully. "Is that how you see what you have accomplished here?" Webb considered the question, thinking about the past several hours spent in intimate contact with the Queen's neural patterns, the trust she had placed in him, the vulnerability she had revealed. "No," he said finally. "I think what I accomplished was proving that two very different beings can trust each other completely when it matters. The improved armor is just a side effect." Queen Lysara moved closer, her enhanced armor making her movements seem to flow like water. "Marcus," she said softly, "what you have given me today goes far beyond technical repairs. You have reminded me that strength is not diminished by accepting help from others." Webb found himself looking into luminous eyes that seemed to see through all the professional distance he usually maintained, recognizing something in her expression that made his pulse quicken despite every logical reason why that was a terrible idea. "Your Majesty," he began, then stopped as she raised a hand. "Lysara," she said, "after what we have shared today, I think we can dispense with formal titles in private. And Marcus." "Yes, thank you for everything." 3 weeks later, Webb found himself standing in the primary engineering bay of the combined human-Zephyrian fleet, watching technicians from both species work together to integrate his armor enhancement protocols into standard battle gear. The sight of human engineers collaborating seamlessly with Zephyrian biotechnicians would have been unimaginable just months ago, but necessity had a way of making the impossible routine. "The neural interface modifications you developed for Queen Lysara have revolutionized our defensive capabilities," said Chief Engineer Valdez, reviewing the latest performance reports. "Combat effectiveness is up 30% across all units equipped with the hybrid systems." Webb nodded absently, his attention focused on a diagnostic display showing power distribution patterns that reminded him of the delicate work he'd done in the Queen's private chambers. The key was understanding that human technology doesn't have to replace Zephyrian biomechanics. It can enhance them, like harmony instead of discord. "Speaking of harmony," Valdez said with a kind of carefully neutral tone that meant he was about to discuss something above Webb's security clearance. "Queen Lysara has requested your presence at the strategic planning session for the next phase of operations against the Void Swarm." Webb looked up from his displays, surprised. Strategic planning sessions were typically restricted to senior military leadership and royal advisors, not mid-level engineers, regardless of how successful their recent projects had been. "She specifically requested me. By name. Apparently, your insights into hybrid technology integration have become essential to their tactical planning." Valdez handed him a data pad with security authorizations that Webb had never expected to see. "The meeting is in 1 hour. Try not to accidentally redesign their entire military doctrine." The conference chamber was a masterpiece of diplomatic architecture, spacious enough to accommodate both human and Zephyrian leadership styles, with bioluminescent displays that could present information in formats both species could interpret effectively. Webb entered to find the combined command staff already assembled, Their attention focused on holographic battle projections that made his engineering challenges look refreshingly simple. Queen Lysara, he corrected himself privately, stood at the center of the tactical display, her enhanced armor casting subtle light patterns that seemed to complement the holographic data streams. She looked every inch the royal commander, but when she glanced up and caught his eye, Webb saw something that looked remarkably like warmth beneath the professional composure. "Engineer Webb," she said formally, though he caught the slight emphasis on his name. "Thank you for joining us. Your expertise in hybrid technology integration has become crucial to our strategic planning." Admiral Harrison gestured to a position near the tactical display. "Webb, we need your assessment of whether the armor enhancement protocols can be adapted for shipboard systems. If we can integrate human diagnostic capabilities with Zephyrian biomechanical defenses, we could create vessels capable of real-time adaptation to void swarm attack patterns," Webb finished, his mind already working through the technical challenges. "It's possible, but it would require establishing neural interfaces between human crew members and Zephyrian bioship systems." "Neural interfaces between species?" asked Commander Thuron, the senior Zephyrian tactical officer. "The physiological risks would be enormous." Webb moved to the holographic display, calling up technical schematics that showed the integration protocols he'd developed. "Not direct neural connection. That would be fatal for humans. But we could create interface buffers that translate human thought patterns into biomechanical commands, like the armor repair work, but scaled up for ship systems." Queen Lysara stepped closer to examine the technical data, and Webb was acutely aware of her presence beside him. "This would require unprecedented trust between our species," she said. "Human crew members would need to merge their consciousness temporarily with living Zephyrian technology, and Zephyrian bioships would need to accept human neural patterns as legitimate command input," Webb added. "It's not just a technical challenge, it's a fundamental reimagining of how our species can work together." The discussion that followed was intense, technical, and occasionally heated, as both human and Zephyrian leadership grappled with the implications of Webb's proposal. But gradually, consensus emerged around a radical new approach to combined operations. Hybrid crews operating hybrid vessels using hybrid technology that leveraged the strengths of both civilizations. "The first test will be conducted using my personal command vessel," Queen Lysara announced. "If Engineer Webb's protocols can successfully integrate human consciousness with Zephyrian bioship systems, we will know whether this approach is viable for fleet-wide implementation." Admiral Harrison looked troubled. "Your Majesty, using yourself as a test subject for experimental neural interface technology seems unnecessarily risky." "Admiral," Lysara replied with quiet authority, 3 weeks ago I trusted Engineer Webb with my life when my armor's neural interface failed. His work not only saved me, but enhanced my combat capabilities beyond anything I thought possible. If anyone can successfully bridge the gap between human and Zephyrian consciousness, it is him." Webb felt the weight of that trust settling on his shoulders again, but this time it felt less like burden and more like purpose. "Your Majesty, Lysara, I'll need direct access to your bioship's neural matrix to develop the interface protocols. It will be similar to the armor work, but more complex." "Then we begin immediately," she said. "The Void Swarm is regrouping for another assault, and we need every advantage we can develop." The weeks that followed were a blur of technical innovation, testing, and gradual revelation. Working closely with Queen Lysara to develop the bioship interface protocols, Webb discovered that their connection went beyond professional collaboration. The trust forged during those vulnerable hours in her chambers had grown into something deeper, a partnership that transcended the boundaries between their species. The first test of the hybrid bioship systems was conducted against a void swarm scouting force, with Webb serving as the human neural interface operator, while Queen Lysara commanded the bioship's organic systems. The integration was seamless. Human analytical thinking merged with Zephyrian intuitive understanding to create tactical responses that neither species could have achieved alone. "Marcus," Lysara said during the battle, their consciousness briefly merged through the bioship's neural matrix. "I can feel your thoughts guiding the defensive calculations. This is extraordinary." Webb, his awareness expanded through the ship's biomechanical senses, could perceive the battle from perspectives no human had ever experienced. "Lysara, your tactical instincts are feeding directly into the ship's adaptive responses. We're not just fighting together, we're thinking together." The victory over the Void Swarm scouts was decisive, but more importantly, it proved that the hybrid technology could work on a larger scale. Within months, the combined human-Zephyrian fleet was equipped with integrated systems that made them formidable opponents for any enemy that relied on conventional tactics. But the real victory was personal. As Webb and Queen Lysara worked together to refine and expand their hybrid technologies, their professional partnership evolved into something neither had expected when he first approached her damaged armor with uncertain hands. "You know," Lysara said during one of their late-night engineering sessions, "when I whispered, 'Careful. That part is sensitive' during your first repair work, I was referring to more than just the neural interface." Webb looked up from the biomechanical schematics they were reviewing, seeing warmth and vulnerability in her luminous eyes. "I suspected as much, though I have to admit, I was too terrified of accidentally killing you to think about the implications at the time." And now, Webb considered the question, thinking about the months they'd spent building something unprecedented. Not just the hybrid technologies that were revolutionizing interstellar warfare, but the trust and connection that had grown between a human engineer and an alien queen. "Now I think that the most important repairs aren't always the ones you can see," he said. "Sometimes fixing something means building it into something stronger than it was before." Queen Lysara smiled, the genuine expression he'd come to treasure, so different from her public royal composure. "Marcus Webb, you repaired more than my armor that day. You reminded me that strength comes not from standing alone, but from trusting others to stand with you." The final battle against the Void Swarm's primary hive mind became the ultimate test of everything they had built together. Using bioships enhanced with human technology and crewed by integrated human-Zephyrian teams, they achieved a victory that neither species could have won alone. But more than that, they proved that the strongest bonds weren't forged in conquest, but in moments of mutual trust and shared vulnerability. As Webb stood beside Queen Lysara on the command deck of their flagship, watching the remnants of the Void Swarm retreat into deep space, he reflected on how much had changed since that first day in her chambers. "Your Majesty," he said formally, aware that they were surrounded by both species leadership, "the integration protocols have exceeded all performance expectations. I believe we've successfully demonstrated the viability of permanent human-Zephyrian technological cooperation." Queen Lysara turned to face him, her enhanced armor catching the light from the bioluminescent displays in patterns that seemed to dance with her emotions. "Engineer Webb," she replied with equal formality, though her eyes sparkled with private amusement, "I believe we have demonstrated something far more important than technological cooperation. We have proven that understanding between different peoples begins with the willingness to trust each other in moments of vulnerability." Later in the privacy of her quarters, she would add quietly, "And sometimes, Marcus, the most sensitive parts are the ones that matter most." Webb understood then that what had begun as an emergency repair had become something neither of them had expected, a partnership that transcended species, ranks, and the careful distance between engineer and queen. They had built something stronger than armor, more durable than technology, and more valuable than military victory. They had built trust that could bridge any gap, whether measured in light years or the space between two hearts that had learned to beat in harmony.